Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been hitting the summer barbecue circuit with rhetoric around debunked claims that the World Economic Forum is attempting to impose its agenda on sovereign governments. Poilievre has said that none of his ministers will be allowed to attend World Economic Forum meetings when he becomes Prime Minister. The Conservative Party also recently sent out mailers with a poll asking people to tell Prime Minister Justin Trudeau who they think the Prime Minister should stand with, working Canadians or the World Economic Forum. Some experts suggest it's a sign that some conspiracy theories are moving from the fringes of the internet into mainstream thinking as people's distrust of government grows. Let's talk about this and everything Canadian politics this week. CTV News political commentator and former federal NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us once again. Tom, it's great to have you back.
Good to be with you, Tony.
Let's talk about the barbecue circuit. I mean, that's what's happening right now, and Poilievre bringing up the World Economic Forum. Does that play with everyday voters, do you think? I mean, there must be a strategy.
I think that's the number one question. By the way, Poilievre and the Conservatives have lots of money, and they do deep polling. They do a lot of focus groups. So they know this must be striking a chord with some Canadian voters. But I'm with you on this one. I really doubt that the average Canadian voter who's looking at inflation and the cost of food, something where Poilievre has been scoring quite well, thank you, is actually concerned about the World Economic Forum. And Tony, it leads into other economic theories and a rabbit hole that you can fall into rather rapidly. If you look at the tropes that are used by people who talk against the World Economic Forum, all of a sudden you're talking about George Soros, and that leads to some very unfortunate thinking that, I'm not saying that this is Poilievre's case, but that is frankly anti-Semitic. You're talking about old tropes that are against the Jewish population around the world. So I think that you have to be super careful when you pander to this sort of thing. Some of this has specifically to do with what happened in Manitoba. Pierre Poilievre was in the fight of his life to hold on to a key riding. Maxime Bernier thought he had a chance of taking it. They used everything that they could. They even used, very unfortunately, anti-LGBTQ tropes, saying that, for example, that Bernier had been to gay pride parades, that sort of thing. Very unseemly, very uncharacteristic of Canadian politics. So you would have thought that maybe Poilievre would have wanted to shelve some of that talk during the summer and look for a more mainstream approach. He's been trying to tone down his rhetoric, the way he looks, even the tone of his voice, and trying to make himself more user-friendly for voters. He shows pictures of himself, his wife, their children. And here, again, he's winking at the hardest hard-right base. Is he worried about Bernier? Does he actually believe this? I remember him saying that he thought that Bitcoin was a great hedge against inflation. And he's also said that he's going to fire the head of the Bank of Canada. That's very marginal thinking. And it's the type of thing that gives pause to the average Canadian. When he was in charge of electoral reform, he did everything he could to bring in something that would have made it much harder for people who didn't have all the IDs and all the things that were being required. And that often means poor people, make it much harder for them to vote. He talks about freedom a lot. What's the most fundamental freedom that we have as Canadians in a democracy? The right to vote. So there's the Pierre Poilievre who talks that game for his base, and the Pierre Poilievre who wants to be more mainstream. We'll see which one shows up for the election.
So, Tom, then, if we do talk about something that a lot of Canadians, perhaps it would capture their attention, and that is the personal branding, with the Conservatives kind of ahead in some polls in polling overall as a party, who's winning the personal branding contest right now, do you think? Or is it up for grabs?
It's up for grabs. He does have to define himself before his adversaries define him. That's why that friendly face, those films that have been playing in English and French across the country, that's something they've spent a lot of money on. That's a big ad buy that they've done. And they want to define him to the voting public. And they've got a lot of work left to do. He ditched the compulsory tie over the summer. He's a fit guy. He obviously spends a lot of time working out when he can. And, they've gotten rid of the glasses. They've literally changed the tone of his voice. It used to be much more nails on the blackboard type of thing. It was very hard to listen to. But he's literally toned down, and he's talking very differently. That's cosmetic. But what comes back to haunt him is the type of thing you and I are talking about now. Things that make voters uncomfortable. He has a wide swath of young voters who are listening to him. That's unusual for a Conservative leader. He's talking about pocketbook issues for the average working family, stealing a little bit of thunder from the NDP. But at the same time, he's talking to young people. That's the bailiwick of the Liberals. That's Trudeau's folks. And he's saying, look, you're the first generation in Canadian history who risked being poorer than their parents. You will not be able to buy a house. They're listening to that. And so when he comes up with that sort of thing, he gets a wide audience. But then he can be turning people off very quickly with this weird conspiracy theory stuff that he seems to actually believe. And that's, I guess, the most disquieting. To your question, is this based on focus groups and he's just saying what he thinks people want to hear? I think that he's saying what he believes people want to hear, but he actually believes it.
Okay, I guess it's all about striking a balance, as you know, Tom, as always in politics. I guess we'll see where this goes from the barbecue circuit to Parliament Hill this fall.
Exactly.
In the meantime, Tom Mulcair, CTV News political commentator, former federal NDP leader, always appreciate it. Thanks, Tom.
Good to be with you.